Right, I think if we gather over here, I just want to show you that I've got two documents that I'm basing what I'm doing today upon. The first of these is this one. It's a book by P.D.Ouspensky. It's a book called In Search of the Miraculous, and it's a book that was published in 1950. So from 1950 onwards, anyone with sufficient cash in their pocket can buy this book and go into a shop, buy this book. It's been published and they can read it and they will know what P.D.Ouspensky was teaching. Prior to this, of course, no one really knew what P.D.Ouspensky was teaching, because this book was not published, it was not freely available. It was read aloud, or sections of it were read aloud, at meetings over which Mr. Ouspensky presided, but overall, the pupils of Ouspensky died in London in 1947. This book was published in 1950. So the pupils of Ouspensky did not know what Ouspensky was teaching. They did not have access, free access to this book. It has not been published. So this is the first document. Very important book. The second document is this one. And this is the book by Gurdjieff, George Ivanovich Gurdjieff. Georgiadis, his actual name. He wasn't actually called Gurdjieff. This is the book. It's published here, Beelzebub's Tales to his Grandson. And it's using there the what we call a Saxon genitive, Beelzebub's, to indicate possession. So the actual title, if we stretch it out, is the Tales of Beelzebub to his grandson. So there is a situation when we, in English, the English language, we use the Saxon genitive. Beelzebub's Tales to his grandson contains a certain implication that it is about Beelzebub, because that's what comes first in the title. But it's not about Beelzebub at all. The actual title is the Tales of Beelzebub to his grandson. So it's about the tales, stories, and this becomes important later on. And I'll explain why, of course, later on. This book was published in 1950. So in 1950 anyone could buy this book and could read it and would know what Gurdjieff was teaching. Prior to this book was not available, and to actually listen to chapters read aloud was not easy. It was not easy to come into contact with Gurdjieff. It was not easy to come into contact with those who had been in contact with Gurdjieff and by some chance had copies or fragments of this book. But the book was published in 1950. You could buy the book in 1950 and read it, and you would know what Gurdjieff was teaching. Those prior to 1950, I suggest, did not necessarily know what Gurdjieff was teaching. So these two books are very important. Both of them published in 1950, can be bought from then on by anyone, man in the street. The man in the street could read them and would know what Ouspensky was teaching, or had been teaching, and what Gurdjieff was teaching, or had been teaching, from 1950 onwards. So these are the two documents that I'm going to use in this series of talks that you've subscribed to. Now, I've been interested in Gurdjieff's teaching, in Ouspensky's teaching for over 50 years now. I'm an old man, 70 years old. And for the first, shall we say, 20 years of that, I was concerned with what we call the Gurdjieff tradition. That is, what was presented as if it is Gurdjieff's teaching, or as if it was Gurdjieff's teaching. And this comes from Ouspensky. Because what I'm going to say here, the reason I've introduced these two documents is that there are actually two completely different teachings associated with Gurdjieff. The first is the Gurdjieff tradition. This is what was being taught prior to 1950 and after 1950, even when these books were available to the ordinary man and could be read, so that we would know what Gurdjieff was teaching and Ouspensky was teaching. So there is a Gurdjieff tradition, and I suggest that the Gurdjieff tradition comes from this book. It comes from Ouspensky, and it comes from Ouspensky's teaching in London primarily during the years from 1921 to 1941. Ouspensky died in London in 1947, and then, as I've said, this book, In Search of the Miraculous, was published in 1950. Only then could anyone, any pupil of Ouspensky, anyone interested, only then could they know what it was that Ouspensky was teaching, because it's written in the book, and the book's published in 1950. Prior to that, Ouspensky's pupils did not know what he was teaching. They attended fortnightly talks, lectures, question and answer sessions. Perhaps parts of this book were, fragments of this book were read aloud, but overall they did not have access to this document. So they did not know what Ouspensky was teaching. But a tradition has arisen, a Gurdjieff tradition has arisen from this, from Ouspensky's teaching and from this book. This I call the Gurdjieff tradition. And what I realised, starting probably, I think, about 1990, so quite a while ago, by reading these two books, by reading Gurdjieff's own book, The Tales of Beelzebub to his grandson, published, as I say, in 1950, I'm emphasising this point, aren't I? And therefore, anyone can buy this book and read it. Prior to that, previously, you could not do this. No one knew what Gurdjieff was teaching. So, about 1990, reading both these books, having read both these books for perhaps 20 years or more, it became very, very clear to me that they were two completely different teachings. Prior to that, prior to 1990, I had assumed that the Gurdjieff tradition, coming from Ouspensky, I claim, was somehow found, could somehow be found, was embedded or secretly hidden in the book, The Tales of Beelzebub, to his grandson, by Gurdjieff. But of course, it isn't. Because there are two completely different teachings associated with Gurdjieff. There is the Gurdjieff tradition coming from Ouspensky and this book. And there is Gurdjieff's own teaching coming from his own book. This book, The Tales of Beelzebub to his grandson. And these two books are completely different teachings. So this is going to be a theme. I think this is important because, mainly because, by comparing these two books, comparing these two teachings, finding out everywhere, in fact it is true everywhere, we find they are completely different. And by examining all these differences in details, in the general overall tone of the teaching, at all different levels, by looking at the differences between these two teachings, we come to understand the two teachings and the significance of these two teachings. So that's going to be what I'm going to be talking about here over the next few weeks. So there is a Gurdjieff tradition that comes from Ouspensky completely, totally different from Gurdjieff's own teachings, which Gurdjieff has written down in this book, The Tales of Beelzebub, to his grandson. Both these books were published in 1950. So from then on, anyone can buy these books, can read these books, and can know what Ouspensky was teaching, and can know what Gurdjieff was teaching. And what I'm saying here is that these two things are completely different. Now what I can do, because you'll be asking me what are these teachings about? Why are they in any way connected? Let me explain the overall theme of what I am saying here. And this is not in any sense directly from Gurdjieff or Gurdjieff's writings. It's not directly in any sense from Ouspensky and Ouspensky's writings. But what am I going to be talking about in this series of talks? Why should we consider the teachings of Gurdjieff? Why should we consider the teachings of Ouspensky? And the way I introduce this is to pose a question. And I think this question is fundamental not only to Gurdjieff's teaching, not only to Ouspensky's teaching, but to our lives in general, and should be fundamental in our lives. Excuse me. So it's a big question. And I've never seen anyone else ask it. So the question is this. This is how I put the theme that I'm going to be talking about. And this is how I define it. So the question is it possible for the ordinary man or woman in the course of their lives to develop in some way? So that's the start of the question. Is it possible for the ordinary man or woman in the course of their life to develop in some way? And I go on to say, and if so, what is it in them that develops? And how? So that's the question that I think I'm taking. It's my question. It's a question I'm taking as the central theme of these talks, and these talks are about the differences between the Gurdjieff tradition coming from Ouspensky and Gurdjieff's own teaching coming from his own writings. So the question is it possible for the ordinary man or woman in the course of their life to develop in some way? And if so, what is it in them that develops? And how does it develop? That is to say, in a sense, what should we do if this is possible to develop? So that's the question, that's the fundamental question, and there it is written down so that we can keep it in our mind whilst I'm speaking here about the differences, the total difference between the traditional teaching ascribed to Gurdjieff, coming from Ouspensky in this book, In Search of the Miraculous, and Gurdjieff's own teaching, coming from his own writings, this book, The Tales of Beelzebub, to his grandson. There's the question, and I say there are two completely different teachings coming from these two books and these two teachers. Now, bearing this question in mind, and I have said that there are two completely different teachings associated with the name of G.I. Gurdjieff. There is a Gurdjieff tradition coming from Ouspensky, and there is Gurdjieff's own teaching coming from his book, The Tales of Beelzebub, to his grandson. So, in the light of this question, there are clearly, what I'm leading up to, you will understand, is that there are two completely opposite answers to this, and these are these two completely different teachings. So if we take the Gurdjieff tradition, this is the teaching ascribed to Gurdjieff and taught as if it is Gurdjieff's teaching. I suggest it comes from the teachings of Ouspensky, and in particular from this book, In Search of the Miraculous, by P.D.Ouspensky, published, as I've said, in 1950. In the light of the question, is it possible for the ordinary man or woman in the course of their life to develop in some way? Then the Gurdjieff tradition says, yes, it is possible for the ordinary man or woman in the course of their life to develop. When we ask, what is it in them that develops? The Gurdjieff tradition says that what is developing in them, by means in fact of work upon oneself, by means of efforts on our own part, primarily psychological and physical efforts, what develops in us is our consciousness of self, our consciousness. That is, what develops is our awareness of the world around us and of ourselves within that world around us. How we operate in that world. Consciousness of self. And this is the Gurdjieff tradition. So the Gurdjieff tradition is saying, in answer to this question, yes, we can develop in the course of our lives by means of work upon ourselves. And this development is the development in us of our consciousness of self. That's the Gurdjieff tradition. Now, what I'm actually saying, of course, is that Gurdjieff himself has written something completely different in his book, The Tales of Beelzebub, to his grandson. What Gurdjieff has written, in answer to this question, he says, there is no way at all that the ordinary man or woman, in the course of their life, can develop in any way. There is absolutely no possibility for development in them. They have fallen to such a low energetic level. An energetic level. So it's about energies. They have fallen to such a low energetic level that any attempt to change ourselves, sorry about the grammar, but any attempt to change ourselves does not work and only, in fact, makes our situation worse. So there's no possibility that the ordinary man or woman in the course of their life can develop in any way. And any attempt to do so does not work and only makes our situation worse. And that this is a product of an energetic situation, which I'll of course explain and which Gurdjieff explains. But it is a product of an energetic situation. We've fallen to such a low energetic level that we can't develop in any way. Any attempt to do so does not work and only makes our situation worse. He goes on, Gurdjieff, he goes on to say, therefore, what is required and what he is teaching, what Gurdjieff is teaching, is that a complete transformation is necessary before any individual development can even begin. We must raise the energetic level of the whole organism, the human organism, as a whole, everything about it. We must raise the energetic level of the whole organism up to a much higher level. And only then can any development begin. And further, Gurdjieff suggests very strongly that this is a very rare event. So, in answer to the question, is it possible for the ordinary man or woman to develop in the course of their life in any way? If so, what is it in them that develops, and how? There are two completely opposite answers. Whereas the Gurdjieff tradition says, yes, 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 we can develop by means of work upon ourselves. And this development is the development in us of our consciousness of self, of our consciousness. But Gurdjieff himself, in his own book, writes complete opposite. It is not possible for the ordinary man or woman in the course of their life to develop in any way. Any attempt to do so does not work and actually only makes their situation worse, makes our situation worse. Before we can develop, a very rare event must take place. We must work towards a transformation, a raising of the whole energetic level of the whole organism, a raising of the energetic level of the whole organism up to a new level. And only at this new level, this higher level, can any individual development begin. So I think you perhaps start to see that there are two completely different teachings, as I have said, associated with Gurdjieff. Now, I've said that there are two completely different teachings associated with Gurdjieff, and that Gurdjieff's actual teaching can be found in his own writings in this book, The Tales of Beelzebub, to his grandson, by Gurdjieff, and published, as I say, in 1950. So, where does Gurdjieff actually say that a transformation is required? Because I'm saying to you that for Gurdjieff himself, no development is possible for the ordinary man or woman during the course of their life. Any attempt to change ourselves does not work and only makes our situation worse, and a transformation is necessary to raise the energetic level of the whole organism, the whole human being, up to a new energetic level, a higher energetic level, at which point, and only at this point, our own individual development can begin. Now, where does Gurdjieff write this? Now, there are a number of elements to that teaching. And the point at which I started, and this is referring back to when I started to look at the differences really between Gurdjieff's own teaching and the traditional teaching ascribed to Gurdjieff, my own starting point was a paragraph in the first chapter of this book, The Tales of Beelzebub, to his grandson, a chapter by Gurdjieff himself, entitled The Arousing of Thought. And I've used this paragraph, I'm going to use this paragraph to start to introduce some of the elements of Gurdjieff's own teaching. I did so, was it 2010? It was a conference in Greece, in Loutraki in Greece. I was able to introduce this paragraph into, shall we say, the Gurdjieff tradition. Whether anyone took any notice, I don't know. But it's my way of introducing, or beginning to introduce, Gurdjieff's actual teaching, as expressed in his writings. So, let me read you the paragraph in question, in which Gurdjieff speaks about this transformation. So we're looking for this word, the transformation. And here it is then. This is from page 24 of The Tales of Beelzebub, to his grandson. He says, I wish to bring to the knowledge of what is called your pure waking consciousness the fact that in the writings following this chapter of warning, that is, following this first chapter, I shall expound my thoughts intentionally in such sequence and with such logical confrontations that the essence of certain real notions may, of themselves, automatically, so to say, go from this waking consciousness, which most people in their ignorance mistake for the real consciousness, but which I affirm and experimentally prove is the fictitious one, into what you call the subconscious, which ought to be, in my opinion, the real human consciousness, and there, by themselves, mechanically bring about that transformation which should in general proceed in the entirety of a man and give him, from his own conscious mentation, the results he ought to have, which are proper to man. So there we have the word transformation. If I summarise that, take out some of what might be called the padding, but each word in that paragraph is absolutely essential. What Gurdjieff is saying: I shall expound my thoughts in such sequence and with such logical confrontation that the essence of certain real notions may of themselves automatically go into the subconscious, which ought to be the real human consciousness. And there, these essence of certain real notions by themselves mechanically bring about that transformation which should proceed in the entirety of a man and give him the results he ought to have, which are proper to man. So Gurdjieff is expounding in a certain sequence the essence of certain real notions. So this is something that we can question. What does he mean by the essence of certain real notions? Because these are clearly, these essence of certain real notions, this essence of certain real notions, these are the things, this is what Gurdjieff is teaching, in order to bring about, and he says, by themselves mechanically, the transformation that he is writing about, that he is concerned about. And this transformation, that this might happen, he's going to place these essence, or this essence of certain real notions, into our subconscious, or place it into us in such a way that they will pass into the subconscious, our true conscious mind, and thereby themselves mechanically bring about this transformation. So that's the paragraph that first alerted me to the massive difference between the Gurdjieff tradition, for whom anything automatic, anything mechanical is anathema. And yet here Gurdjieff is saying, automatic, he uses the word automatic, by themselves mechanically bring about that transformation. So there's a lot in there that when I first encountered this paragraph and began to study this paragraph of Gurdjieff's own writings, it contradicted what I knew from the Gurdjieff tradition and was therefore of great interest to me. And this was the beginning of a massive investigation that has been taking place ever since, comparing, contrasting the traditional teaching ascribed to Gurdjieff, which I say comes from Ouspensky, and is completely different from Gurdjieff's own teaching, which, as with this paragraph, comes from Gurdjieff's own writings. So that's the first paragraph, that's the first piece of Gurdjieff's actual writings that we're going to look at, that we can look at, and there is so much in it. So this is going to be one of the next steps that we take.